So with that said, now I want to invite, we have 3 people here today. And Dan, you are on there. How about that? You made it? But we got Michael Hoffman, who's with Shell. He's a principal engineer at Shell. And we have Jason Nations, who's senior manager of enterprise security for OGE Energy. And Dan Rosinski, who's a technical fellow and a long-time friend, manufacturing and engineering with the, I don't know what to call you anymore. It used to be the Dow Chemical Company. Is it still the Dow Chemical or Dow DuPont or
Dow Chemical Company for now, but it'll shortly be Dow.
Just Dow with no the? Oh, for years it's been funny because alphabetically we used to always have to put the Dow Chemical Company. But anyhow, so would you guys please come up to the stage here? And just to frame, I mean, I asked these 3 gentlemen to participate because they have familiarity with investigating these kinds of solutions for different purposes. And I think it's important to understand, and what I have some questions for them, but can you all fit in there? I'm sorry about the tight space.
Too many.
Go ahead.
But what I want to open it to the floor. It's not me to ask questions. That's what we're not here for. Though, as I mentioned this morning, I don't miss no opportunity to do research. But it's really trying to get a sense of what were they looking for? What are they trying to accomplish with their own interests? What is their company kind of worried about? What are they thinking about to kind of frame what kind of solution might fit? Now, I didn't ask you guys to make presentations. I made that offer to you. You were late in the game, so I don't know if I gave you that offer. But anyhow, I don't know, can you, each of you just say a few things about your company, what you do, what you have associated with this, what you've been looking at or not, or what your needs are relative to this, just some opening introductory comments. That'll give me a chance to sit down too. So.
Hey, I'm the fill-in. You guys got to go first.
All right, you can talk right there if you like.
Does this work? Okay. Yeah, so I work for a vertically integrated electric utility, and so we have generation, transmission, and distribution, and so those are all concerns for us. I would say that we started this journey as sort of the tail end of our smart grid deployment. We started recognizing that we had a large amount of data, and then as you sort of alluded to, and I think we've seen in other cases, if you have a large amount of data and you can't do anything to operationalize it, then it's not any value to you. I think Target was aware of the vulnerabilities that they had, but they weren't able to operationalize those. And so that's been a challenge for us. We've been looking for a while on how exactly can we take data out of that environment in a real-time way. A couple of earlier sessions sort of mentioned that, you know, you want this segmentation and this air gap, and we all say that we really want an air gap, but then manager types understand that there's some piece of data or telemetry they could get out of the environment, and they really want that. And then as a utility, we have emissions monitoring, we have PI and historian data that we absolutely have to pull out. And so the efficacy of your air gap can get challenged. And so then to think we're going to now make another hole in this alleged air gap to pipe security telemetry out is kind of an interesting, we're not eating our own dog food kind of conversation. And so that's been a challenge. I think we honestly had to get to a point where we had comfort as a security group, and then also as with our other stakeholders. I think this is really, as you've talked a little bit, I think this is really a people problem from our perspective, because we recognized that there was a need, and we just had to get a lot of people engaged and on board and enrolled to be able to enable that capability. And so we've looked at a lot of different vendors. I like your definitions quite a bit. I would tell you that I think it's very important to understand your environment in that sort of Rumsfeldian, I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know, and I know what I don't know, I know, that sort of thing. It's very important because you've got to understand your environment, because if you don't know what's happening in your processes, then you can't detect anomalous behavior. In my experience, the user behavior analytics space is very, very, very centric to a corporate network, but not to a process-based system. They're often driven on users log in to whatever, an Active Directory, and not necessarily to how we're executing a process. So we've not had a lot of success there. What I would say, though, is one of the things that we looked for primarily was a partner that could come alongside. we hear ad nauseum about the security talent gap, and to some extent, I think that's true. But I think that it's not insurmountable, and I think also too that some people think security is just not doable, and I think that it's hard. So we have to do it, though. I mean, I'm gonna not throw hot takes at you on that, but so as a challenge, what I would say is that we've looked for vendors and partners in that space that could help us. One of the things that we've done, though, is we've defined our use cases very, very, very specifically. Here's what we're trying to get, and then we're now trying to find somebody who can fit that, right? If a vendor has a Swiss Army knife with like 87 blades that they sell me, but I only need 4, well, I don't want to buy that crazy big knife. I just want to buy the one with 4. So I can limit that down. I feel like we've had some pretty good success, and we're pretty happy with where we are. From a maturity perspective, that's another thing Sid talked about. I think that some of the things that we're doing now, we're getting into almost threat hunting, and I wrote it down. You talked about impact reduction. We think of it in terms of reduction of dwell time. So if there's a bad guy doing something, we want to limit that amount of time. If we go back and look at the Verizon reports and other things, they talk about, people are in your environment for 6 months before they actually acted. So if we can limit the dwell time to something shorter, then we can really, really, really reduce the impact that they've got on our environment. And those are not skills that we have native. Those are hard to develop, and I'd also say they're very perishable. So if you're a giant organization, then you're going to have maybe some opportunity to add headcount or other things that in my organization I just don't. We've got finite resources, so we're trying to protect our most critical resources. I think I'm kind of just rambling here, so I can stop and just turn this over. I'm happy to answer, though. I think there'll be some more panel. I'm going to turn this over, but I think it's a big challenge. I think what Sid said, I generally agree with everything that he said. Nothing sounded crazy as just an asset owner or as somebody who's actually in the field kind of executing on this stuff. I think that the biggest thing I would tell you is that you need to understand your environment, because no vendor, despite what their salespeople are going to say, will fully understand what you need. And that it's imperative for you to make sure that you've got your use cases lined out. And that's a level of effort that you're going to have to go through to get to where you really need to be. And then I would say, too, that you won't get to that really deep understanding of your full use cases if it's just your cybersecurity team. You're going to need to have your process folks, your engineers, your plant folks. All of those guys are going to have to sit with you and help you understand, right? I know just enough about generating electricity to be dangerous. I'm not an engineer by trade. I have a political science undergrad. Maybe it just makes me be able to speak human. I don't know. But I had to go really learn, and I had to go and be sort of intellectually humble and say, look, I recognize that I don't know what this is about, and work with some guys to really understand how impacts of the control system would be. So I'm going to turn it over now, and I hope that was okay. Thanks.
Perfectly fine. Thank you.
Excellent job, Jason. So Mike Hoffman, downstream Shell. So I've had the opportunity to be in, the global role, which I'm in for the past 2 years. But I've come up kind of through the ranks, started out as instrument tech, and moved on up. So I have a lot of plant floor experience. And so a couple of years ago, I was at a SANS class, and Rob Lee, of course, owner of Dragos, was talking, and he brought up the sliding scale of maturity. And so it's similar to a maturity model that you have here. And at the time, I was trying to answer the question of what's going on in my environment. And so at the time, I was a we call them site focal point or ICS security engineer at a refinery, one of our plants, before I took the global role. So, as a security expert at the plant, my job day in day out was to keep my systems operational, make sure I have a proper asset inventory, know the connectivity in the networks, harden my systems and all that kind of stuff. And so, day in day out, like when somebody asked me what is operating in your environment of 250 some Windows system endpoints and probably over 1,000 connections, and it was a hard one to answer. And so that's when I was like, wow, this is really a spot where something where I struggle with, sleeping at night going, I really don't know what's going on in my environment, and I'm the security guy. And so I started down the path of looking at some of these technologies, network security monitoring technologies. And from there, I've gotten into a global role, and now I have oversight across all of our refineries, chemical plants, lube oil plants, shipping pipeline, you name it. So with that, my scope has expanded a little bit, and so we've for the past, I think, year and a half, we've explored, most of the major vendors that you'll probably see up on the slides and that kind of stuff. And what Jason was saying is it's very true. For each environment, each of the vendors does an excellent job for their use case, and their use case may not be your use case. And so for us in our company, Shell's quite a large company, we have dedicated pockets of different teams, and so we already have we have threat hunters, we have incident response teams, we have all integrated IT/OT SOC. So we already have that. So for us, it's how do we get our information from our constrained environments up to these folks to better leverage what they have and give them the same view. And my goal was to get to day in, day out, I want the people to plant to know their systems, and then if something goes wrong, I want to be the folks at our SOC teams to be able to look into the plants and be able to quickly kind of then work together on an issue. And even when you think about restricting down the environments and so forth, the issue always comes up is you see something out in the environment. Let's take WannaCry for instance. When that happened, the big question was, where is SMB version 1 in our environments? And that was one of those things that where we were actually playing with some of these toolings, we could answer that very quickly. And other ones, it was a big scramble and it was a big patch process. Had we have had a lot of this tooling in our environment, we could have easily ran a couple queries and we could say, here's where our problems are, here's how we're isolating them or not, and then come out with a remediation plan from that. So I think for us, really, the big thing has been automated asset inventory. I don't want my folks playing around with spreadsheets and video drawings anymore. Gone are those days. It's 2019. Knowing that just the normal communications our environment and when it becomes anomalous, baselining, if you will, and then also that connectivity. So the ABCs, just quickly walk through that process, the connectivity of those devices, and so when you're doing like an assessment or something like that, it's should my OPC server be talking to this historian or should it be talking to this device? And all of a sudden now one of these computers kicks off a new communication. So that anomalous behavior. So there's a security aspect of these, of this tooling that you want to, try to get to, and to lock down hard in your environment. But it's also from an integrity respect. You have your engineers out there, their whole goal is to keep that plant operational. So you have DCS uptimes, SCADA uptimes, RTU, PLCs, if you will. Now that we have Ethernet as our main connectivity medium, those connections do fail over time. So being able to be, to say that, okay, we have, this one device has a massively high retransmission rate, so we may have actually a physical problem out there. Fiber, Ethernet connectivity, we could be saturated networks, whatever. Some of this tooling will actually allow you to look at your network and see where all these problems are taking place, and you can act on that. So so you can use this from a security perspective, but from day in and day out, it's more or less an integrity and uptime perspective. And I think that's really a win-win, because a lot of the stuff, we all have constrained security budgets, but when you approach this as a more or less, I'm keeping the plant running and I'm going to keep it secure too, and provide that, as you mentioned, a reduced dwell time, so I know who's in our environment and what they're doing. So it's kind of where I'm at. I'll take it over.
This one open, do you think?
Yeah.
It's on? Oh, wow. I have you in my control now. You will listen to everything I say. So I'm Dan Rosinski. I'm a technology fellow at Dow Chemical Company, or the Dow Chemical Company, or Dow DuPont, although that's not officially what we call ourselves. So as you probably know, if you've read anything, Dow's been going through all sorts of changes. So we merged with DuPont. We're getting ready to spin out into 3 different companies. So tons of stuff going on, which makes security even more of a challenge. But it's not a new challenge for Dow. We have grown by acquisition over many decades, right? So back to Union Carbide and Roman Haas, and so there's been many additions and deletions from the Dow network and the Dow family of manufacturing plants. So what that really caused is, if we look across our landscape, we had to reset ourselves over the last couple of years to just make sure we were doing some basic blocking and tackling. So we put a program in place. We've always been a leader in cybersecurity. So Eric Kosman, who's now at ARC, is a retired Dow leader. He was one of our main architects of our security systems. So we have been a leader, but what we realized is over the years, two things happened. Dow changed. We added a bunch of operating facilities, a bunch of manufacturing facilities, and they weren't necessarily set up the way legacy Dow had been designed. And number two, the threat environment changed, right? So over the last 15 years, the threat against manufacturing systems has blossomed. And really in the last 5 years, it's been pretty incredible to watch the growth. So, with that as background, I come into my role as a technology fellow. My job is to focus in on the most pressing technology problems in Dow. So we have people on the technology fellow board, right, or panel or group that focus on, huge, distillation or separations or reactors or distillation or heat exchange problems, or we have big crackers with huge furnaces that have to work and have to be, capable. So I'm a chemical engineer, but most of my career has been spent in systems. So my focus for Dow as a technology fellow is on two things. One is manufacturing cybersecurity. So that is my functional responsibility. We have a program and we have people running the program, but really my job is to make sure we're doing the right things for the future and lining up to be successful at protecting our assets. And the second is I work on our Industry 4.0, our digital Dow kind of initiative to look at how do we digitalize manufacturing. So we view this topic of anomaly detection, threat detection, as a turning point in what we've been working on. Like I said, we had some basic stuff to make sure that of our 400 plus plants, we had the basics of the NIST framework in place. And I'd argue with Sid a little bit. I'd like to see ARC really start describing this stuff in terms of the NIST framework a little more, because it's becoming a common language, but I'll talk to them offline, right? Because, when you talk about identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, everything you talked about fits in one of those. And I suspect what you'd find is if you went and mapped it there, what you'd find is you might try different things, or at least make sure you've got some basic capabilities in place before you move on to the next step. His maturity model is pretty good, but I would also argue what we have found is once you get some basic things in place, like organization, and start building your culture and getting the right cooperation between your IS security people and your OT security people, which we have, then you need to start moving some of these things in parallel. So this area of anomaly detection and threat intelligence, to us, they can't move separately, right? They have to move together. We have to bring in threat intelligence, otherwise our anomaly detection is going to be starved for some outside information. So we need to understand what our normal is in manufacturing across the company and in every plant that, that we're taking a look at and monitoring. But we also need to start feeding in some threat intelligence so we can not only know what normal looks like and is it not normal, but what are some of the incoming threats that we should be aware of? What should we be looking for? And for us, what that means is going from reactive to proactive. So everything we do, if you look at applying patches or antivirus signatures or even building the organization, that's all very reactive. We're all looking to figure out how do we react to something that happens, or how do we catch it faster. We need to get and now turn the corner to be more proactive. And that's what, to me, anomaly detection is all about. It's about finding that actor who's in your network. So one of the basic principles, and it's been talked about before, but I've talked about it at this conference, we will not be able to keep the dedicated attacker out of our systems, right? So if you haven't ever heard that before, it means you're new to this conference, because to a person, everybody who's in this space realizes that the dedicated attacker, the person that's willing to take 6 months or a year and a half to get into your systems, they will get in. They'll find a way in, right? So the proactive part is, let's make sure, I love what these guys say, let's make sure that dwell time, that we limit how long they have, because they're going to take their time and try to learn before they do anything. If we can catch them while they're learning and stop them, right, they never get to the point where they're acting. So the kill chain comes into play here. So we are actively, as part of our program, looking at anomaly detection, looking at some threat intelligence. So Dow has not progressed to the point that these gentlemen have, where they've got some solutions in place. We have some internal tools in place, which we're pretty happy with, but not satisfied with, so we need to take the next step. But to me, one of the messages for folks in this room is do the basics first, right? Use NIST or use the maturity model or what Sid has come up with, but keep in mind that that won't be enough, right? The world around you is going to change, going to keep changing. The threat actors are not going to sleep. In fact, if you take a look out, into the world now, you'll find all sorts of dark net and black hat communities that are all around industrial control systems and, safety instrument systems. They didn't exist 2 years ago or 5 years ago, but they're very active now. So we need to keep pushing. We need to keep moving. And my challenge to the suppliers is Dow needs, since we're big and we believe in leverage, we need you to come to us with solutions that allow us to leverage across many different control systems, many different networks, many different segmentation strategies. It's not just a one size fits all for us. And so we're going to really be pushing our supplier community to help us with that. Just one other thing. We all know what the purpose of a plant is, manufacturing plant. It's to make product. It's not to secure itself or to run security software. So everything we do has to take into account that you cannot affect the operation of that plant with your security software, right? So if your cure is worse than the disease, right? So in other words, if you kill the patient because you put so much medicine in them, right, to make sure he never gets sick, right, you've just defeated yourself. And not only that, but you'll get in lots of trouble. So anyway, that's it for me.
I'm sorry for laughing. I was just thinking of yesterday working on my stuff at ARC. We've done a lot lately about cybersecurity.
Okay.
And things have gotten so slow, I get frustrated. What do I need this for?
Questions?
Yes, any questions? Up here.
Top 3 sources of intelligence. Recording this.
Please announce your name and company.
Jon Brune from Epcor Utilities. Can you give us your top 3 sources of threat intelligence?
Since you're a utility, is that okay if I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, so as a utility, some stuff that we use. So one, of course, ICS cert, because that's our federal government. One that we really like is actually Dragos Worldview. That's a service that those guys have. I don't want to be a shill. I'm just telling you what we're using. Yeah. Worldview it's fantastic. Honestly, it's a differentiator. It's something that we didn't have before we started working with those guys. And I've seen their collateral. I've watched the federal guys take the Dragos name off of the Dragos collateral, put their name on it, and send it out. What I would tell you is threat intelligence is so funny because it means so many different things to so many different people. And right, what is threat intelligence to me is utter garbage to you. What I would tell you is that you should look for threat intelligence feeds that function to try to help you describe tactics, techniques, and procedures rather than indicators of compromise. We've seen now that the malicious actors are getting smarter and everything in the world moves faster, right? Amazon Prime has changed our world, right? Everything is 2 days lickety split, right? So the threat actors are aware that now everybody's caught on like, oh man, we'll all block this one IP address, right? Even malware, config and otherwise, we've seen that can start to think and go from different C2 servers. So if you're using things that are based on indicators of compromise, then you're having people probably spend a lot of time on things that add very little value. And I'm not as big as either of these two guys' company, and so I don't have 200 guys that I can send threat hunting. And so what I'd like to do is maximize my folks' time. So I would tell you to look for the threat intel that helps to speak specifically to your environment, which again, you need to know your environment to be able to know what speaks to your environment. And then also you should be looking at things that are indicators of tradecraft, the TTPs that can say, clearly somebody's doing something and I got to make sure that I understand that. And again, with the goal to reduce as best possible the dwell time that a bad guy has in your environment. It's absolutely correct, I believe, right? It's a matter of when and not if for all of us, just because.
No, good. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I was kind of say the same thing. And add on that, again, the threat feed, so again, it has to be for your business, for your environment. And just because you're getting, threat information, that kind of stuff, it may be, for different companies are looking at different data sources and those kind of things. So you have to really understand, if it's aligned to your business and use case. And again, I would say, and then also, what is that for? Is that an IT threat feed? Is that an OT threat feed? And those kind of things. So just really understand, again, your use cases, and then, kind of the information you're getting. And again, I'd say, again, Dragos has, their platform, and then the threat product. For their threat feeds, it's not helping them out at all, but I would say it's a very, very good solution. So, yeah.
Any comment? No, you don't have to.
The only comment I'd make is one thing to consider about threat intelligence and threat feeds is who do you send it to? I mean, who are your experts? Who gets that information and starts to evaluate it? If you're too security, like information security focused, you're going to miss stuff. If you're too OT, manufacturing or operations focused, you're going to miss stuff. The best is to get a combined group, and whether you're big or small, you need to find ways to get people that can represent both. It's very rare to find one person who can represent both. I mean, you do find them, but they're very rare.
Yeah.
So you need teams, right? You need to partner
I would say
up.
that person's a unicorn. I'm not sure they do exist, but what I'll tell you again, right, is to just make sure that one of the processes that we go through because we subscribe to all sorts of different threat feeds. We get a high number of false positives on most of the ones that we get, and we're working to go through. And so what we do with our analysts is we spend time making sure that these do truly apply to us. They apply to our use cases. Our next move then in our process is that we would have our analysts pass that data forward to whoever the next step is, right? So if it's a threat feed that's talking specifically about IT-related things, we wouldn't bother, it would be cumbersome to share that with some of our field guys unless it specifically applied. But I think that there's nuance to threat feed that it's imperative that you have an analyst. So maybe this is a good thing because robots won't take our ability to think. And so we'll have to have somebody to figure that out. And I completely agree that you can't have this be sent to, if you just blast things out, people are not they're gonna be so desensitized to it as I think, I can't remember if it was one of our last sessions, we just talked about the ramp up rate on the CVE numbers that have gone from like 1,000 a year to 4,000 a year. We can hardly keep track of those, right? We know the biggies, the MS-1710 or MS-08067, that kind of stuff, but it's so hard to keep track of those.
But I imagine that's how they measure that they're doing well. I wasn't in that session. I was running a different site.
Sure.
But I could see someone putting it up and saying, "Look, we went from 1,000 to 4,000."
Absolutely. Well, and
it's good, and maybe it is, but on the other hand,
it's a good problem to have in some ways because it means that we've got lots of researchers and people are starting to see things. But if you're the consumer of that, unless you have the capacity to drink from a fire hose, it's very difficult.
Yep.
So we got other questions.
yeah. Go ahead.
So, Eric Saul from Dow Chemical. And Sid, during your presentation, you talked about in anomaly detection, doing it a lot of different ways, rule-based or policy-based, behavior-based. You talked about signatures as a possibility. And what I wanted to know from the panelists that are doing an anomaly detection is, what are these methods are you using? What have you found most effective of those different types of anomaly detection? And pros and cons.
Yeah, so just to be honest, we're rolling out some of these solutions right now, and we haven't, we've only got them in a couple of our plants. So as far as actually seeing in a real attack occur, we've been blessed. We haven't had one, but yeah, knock on wood. And I think it's true, like we were all saying, that it's just a matter of time, and that's why we're putting these in, no matter how good our defenses are. So with that, I would say I personally kind of think you need both, right? So you need, behavioral, those kind of things, but you also, for me, it's good to understand a baseline and to have, I know it's a way overused term, AI type engines, and to understand, what's normal in your environment and what does change. Because if you look at our systems, I've spent a lot of time in a couple of our plants and in one of our labs, the behavior of the network and the devices, it's really pretty consistent unless you have something dynamically changing all the time. So some of those models work very well. From my perspective, I could be wrong, but yeah. So anyway, I think it's both. I think you have to look at the behavior, and then I think you have to look at what is what is common and normal in your environment. So, yeah,
Behavior as communication behavior.
correct.
Not
Communication
human
behavior. Right.
Did you say you're working with AI right now as a rollout for Anomaly?
Yes.
Is that proprietary AI?
Well, so I mean, some of the vendors, I'm not sure when you really get down into it, what algorithms are using or not, but yeah, they'll use it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, honestly, I would tell you that I'm not sure that signatures are great. As I said, indicators of compromise, that's a signature. If we look at where anti-malware products are, the signature base that if you, like a million years ago when I was an administrator, okay, maybe not a million, but like 18 or 19, we would do McAfee updates every day. Well, that signature file gets so big, and then now the machine can't run. Well, so we go look at the newer next-gen endpoint stuff, and it's running in memory, and it's looking for just behavioral types, because there's only a certain number of ways you can blow up a Windows operating system, for example. So it's looking for anomalous behavior. I'm scared to say AI because I think that means we all have to take a drink, but I think that there are algorithms there that are pretty solid. I think, again, if you know your environment, if you know what normally communicates and doesn't communicate, and then you can start to figure out the deltas there and run those down. One thing Michael said that I would tell you that I think you can sell this back to your business if you don't have support for this type of activity. When we've seen this, because I've got this deployed now across all of my generation fleet. I've got it in distribution. I've got it in transmission. Is that we've used the tool to help us. It's a security tool, but we've used it for operational things. We have a better picture of our environment than we've ever had. We had this anecdotal, well, I think those devices are out there, but I don't know exactly how many I have. And now I've got a pretty good definitive. And one of the things that I would tell you, if it's in your use case, it's in ours, is that I'm trying to reduce the number of panes of glass that I ask my analysts to look at. If I've got 18 tools and 9 analysts, like just think of the numbers there. I got to get 9 guys up to snuff on 18 different tools, and that's really hard. And so what I'm doing now is we're using the vendor that we've got for this solution, and we're starting with that. And then we're pivoting from there into other tools that we believe enrich our feed of data. And so we can watch traffic as it flies in a sort of pew-pew type map, which would tell us like, oh, this is strange. We have alerts that are set up. We have alerts that fire to our SIM, which again, they're just about enriching our feed. And what we've really done here is that our goal is to roll up all of this data that we didn't normally have visibility into, and then be able to make sense of it. So it's kind of again, I sound so cliche, I'm nervous, but like a SIM2, and the way that we're using the data is we're trying to take it and make sense, right? Because when we all got SIMs, we all thought we're going to put every bit of data that we could possibly ever feed to the SIM, and then we all, like 5 minutes later, were like, that's too many alerts. And then you have to dial that down. And so what some of the algorithms that we've got and some of the anomalous behavior on the ICS side, my experience with the DCS is that it's chatty, but in a different way than my normal TCP/IP network in our corporate environment. And so it's a different level, and so I can sort of squeeze that down and make sense of it in a different way. So I think you've got to use the best approaches that you can. Signatures may work, but I mean, if you look at the anti-malware on any control system I've ever seen, the first thing that the deployment vendor does after they install whatever, choose your anti-malware, is they go in and exclude the directory where the application runs, which then gives you bupkis. So signatures are perhaps good, but it depends on what it is. The age of it and it's the efficacy of that signature matters. So if it's really new and you just saw this foreign government using it and you have something that gives you that feed, first you should tell me because I'd like that feed too. And second, I would tell you that that one might work. But otherwise, you could just be blocking or watching on stuff that is not valuable. I'm talking too much. I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
I find it very interesting.
Yeah,
It's
so
pretty
am I.
interesting, right?
So am I.
Any other questions, guys? More questions?
One right there.
Yeah, Andy Anderson, Dispel. I'm curious, you guys talked a lot about dwell time, and some stuff's coming out of NIST in terms of thinking about defending critical infrastructure, resiliency, and they're talking about some strategies, techniques to kind of proactively reduce dwell time, make your systems more challenging for an adversary to understand and to attack. You're seeing some of that at the sort of federal level. I'm curious you guys, are you implementing any of those strategies? And if none of the stuff I'm talking about is relevant, or I can provide more color.
Are you talking about like deception, that kind of stuff?
More like moving target defense, sort of changing, like refreshing systems, those sorts of things, where the system itself is like really challenging for an adversary to understand and to move around.
I would just, we're not investing in any deception right now. And again, I think Dan said it, is that for us, a generation location is, its whole goal is generation. And so it's pretty big that I can even get in there and just walk around. So I'm not the guy who wants to make people not have electricity. So maybe you guys have a different experience, but we're not currently looking at anything like that.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd agree. So, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you represent a potential supplier in that space. I mean, we're always open to learn, but we, like I said, one of the things we need to be very careful of is we are, Dow at least, is moving two things at the same time. We're moving our cybersecurity architecture and all the pieces of it to make sure we have all the parts in place. And that's not just technology, it's people and organization and culture and work process, right? And so that's got to move. Meanwhile, we're also moving down this digitalization road, and we're splitting up the company, right? So all those things are all happening at once. And so we have to be careful. We are interested in figuring out, beyond anomaly detection, what's the next thing. And I do believe that we need to do more to figure out how do we make it harder for the bad guys to move around when they're in, assuming they get in. How do we cloak, deceive, fool, but that's a future thing for us, not a now thing.
Yeah, I would say too that you'd need a high level of maturity in your organization. And one of you guys was talking about just the basics. If you have good blocking and tackling, then you're ready to move to this anomalous detection kind of stuff. If you don't have the ability to make sense of all this big data that you've got, then you need to go work on other things first. And so I think that could be really cool. I think that probably a big thing, and you mentioned it too with the vendors, and I'm small, but I agree with you on the vendors, and if you get help, I want to ride your coattail. We need the vendors in the DCS spaces to be agile and nimble. And we, it's amazing the stuff that we can do and automate, but what we need now though is some different partnerships. And I think it's funny too, because we hear announcements of partnerships quite a bit, but I think a lot of those are hype, and I don't really, as an end user, I can't discern what the benefit to me is about those. So maybe this is a hot shot at you guys, vendor types, sorry. But when we have partnerships announced, I'd really like to understand. So does that mean that this is your only partner? Does that mean that this is one of your partners? Does that mean your product's gonna work with them?
Yeah, and does it mean you won't threaten to remove support from our DCS if we put this stuff on
Kill
it?
our warranty, yes.
That should have.
That's always a challenge.
That's the biggest thing.
Yes. It's question number one of the vendor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have another question right here.
Ben Bennett from Ideto. Beyond the threat detection aspect, how much do you deploy or employ in your philosophy software renewability? And your ability to update devices, firmware, software, apps, whatever it is, knowing full well you are going to be attacked at some point.
No, go ahead.
No, okay. So I guess there's a couple points here. One is, so on the kit itself, the security software. So one of the things that we're looking into actually when we chose the vendor is how well does it scale to actually update the software, and how, in a company the size such as ours, you have different lines of business and so forth. So as you chain up all these smaller devices out in the field up to, an tiered approach up into your SOC and SOC teams and stuff, is that how can we push out updates and that kind of stuff and have it trickle all down? So we'll keep even our security kit up to date. So that was one of the major considerations we had. But kind of coming to your point, I mean that is if you're just talking about keeping up software applications and OS in our environments, yeah, that's something we're constantly struggling with. But what I would say is these tools, and kind of coming back to the maturity model a little bit, is that as you look at, so definitely you need to set up segmentation. I mean, you do all the basics right at the first levels, and then you get to this level. But the thing is, though, a lot of these tools will actually help you to do those lower processes. And so even though you have to have the people capable of running these tools, they'll help you to actually know your vulnerabilities and your or at least what is out there from an OS perspective. When you start talking application, that's where you are actually looking into the device. Sometimes you can pick that up off the wire. Other times you have to use an active method to go in and look at that. So, and some of the vendors are actually becoming active in this space and doing an active query once they learn who the device is. And then you can, it helps you keep up at least what's out there of an inventory and a vulnerability perspective. So.
Yeah, and the only other comment I'll make is we do not have the freedom to just push patches and,
No.
I mean, you cannot push stuff into operations without their permission, right? I mean, especially if the machine's got to come down, but even if it doesn't have to come down, if it has any impact at all on that system, either a process historian, which is less important, or a control system, which is primary importance, right? I mean, there's another set of rules. So, we have this very active discussion inside Dow right now about technical debt. Right? The fact is, we build our control systems and we invest in control systems that will last, and we expect them to last 20 or 30 years. Right? The IT systems, operating systems, I mean, what's the lifetime of a Microsoft operating system, right? It's not 30 years. It's not 20 years. It's not 10 years. Right? So we've got this cycle of fast IT technology, right? The basic computer technology, and this much slower cycle of physical assets and the control systems that run them. And we've got to figure out, and we are busy trying to figure out what's the right mechanism to get those two things in, at least in some kind of sync. And one of the key things is exactly what Michael just said, which is we have to know where things are. We have to know how far out of sync are they, because in some cases they're way out of sync. I mean, they've just, hey, it runs, why would I ever change it? They've been saying that for 30 years. So think about how old that stuff is right now. So, and it's not just the operating system, right? It's the control system software too, right? You look at, ABB or Siemens or Emerson or Foxborough, I can tell you, we have versions of their stuff running that they didn't even know they wrote, right? It's so old. So, well, they might have a couple guys that remember it. But it's a challenge. I mean, I don't know there's an answer. It's a big challenge, right? So.
Is there another question there? I have a question if there isn't.
I don't see any questions.
Right there, Jim Montague. No, he doesn't need the microphone, I assure you.
Hi, Jim Montague, Control Magazine. What we try and do with our coverage most of the time is just, there is so much information out there, it's so confusing for a lot of people. I always try and give people, what are the just practical things that you would advise, a mid-sized, process industry user to do? Is there, what would you if they're not as far along the learning curve as you, what would you advise them to do to improve their security posture?
So I mean, I think that it's about basics, right? So I could give you some cliches, but I want to not do that. I think it's imperative to understand your environment. That's probably the first thing. That's the journey that we started on where I am. When I started at the utility, just understanding what we had, trying to figure out what our gaps are. I think you've got to figure out too, everything's got to be based on risk. You've got to decide what are my critical assets and critical processes in a control system environment, right? The critical process matters. And then once you have some understanding of that, then you can figure out there are going to be low-hanging fruit things that you can start with, even if it's within your DCS configuring group policy or something like that, and then and it's a little bit different than what you might say in a corporate environment where you'd say, all right, we're going to hit the endpoints and we're going to do a bunch of stuff. I think that one of the things I heard earlier today, which I think is really awesome, which we've been very successful at, is developing a culture of security. We've connected to a great extent the why for our field members, our folks that are out in the field. And so now we have them calling us instead of us calling them begging, can I please come to the plant? They're like, hey, we need you to come out because we've got this thing. And so if you can build rapport and relations between your traditionally IT-focused security types and the folks in the field and help them to see the why for both sides, I think that'd be really good. This is stuff that we're talking about now. I think you need to be down the road a little bit. And if you can't do these things, then again, you may not have the capacity to be able to respond to the events. And you've got great alerts, but if you don't have maturity, what I think these because everybody's got sensors in this space, right? Well, if you just deploy these sensors, then what that probably means is you have a lot of blinking servers and a checkbox that you can check off and say, yes, we have sensors, but you can't operationalize that at all. And I think probably I'm just going to say, I think is their goal, everybody's goal here to reduce dwell time is you've got active threat hunting where you're looking at your environment, attempting to make sense of it. You're making suppositions about, oh, do I have this? Do I not? And then you run it down. And what these tools give you, the capacity to do that you didn't have is the visibility to go, yeah, I do have that, or no, I don't. And they can kind of confirm some of that supposition. But if you don't have basics of segmentation and good role-based access controls and an inventory, maybe those are 3 things I would tell you to do.
Right.
Then it's going to be awful hard for you to even deploy these sensors effectively, because one of the things that we ran into is that, we're looking at serious line diagram engineering documents to figure out, right? Because there's the big disconnect between a normal IT diagram is, you get a Visio diagram and some sort of loosey-goosey stuff. Well, in the process side, when we're building something, we want to know what every cable connects to, and every network that's associated with it, and every device that's talking on that network, and that's how we figured out how to size the sensors that we've got so that we had the right capacity. Because again, our goal was not to create an operational impact because we clogged a network in some way or another.
The only other advice I'd give, that's great advice. You start with the basics, but the people in the program need to realize and need to continue to remind their management and their leadership that the basics is not the end, it's the beginning.
Yes.
Right? That's one of the issues I see is smaller companies, especially because I belong to the ACC and we do outreach to smaller chemical manufacturing companies, is they feel like if they get the basics, they've reached the end. The problem is that's not the end. That just gets you in the game, right? So now you can start doing the things to keep up with the threats that are coming. And so part of it is from the very beginning, reminding your management, your leadership, that look, this is a journey, right? And we can find partners. If we're small, we might need a partner to help us, but we cannot stop just because we have good inventory or you've got good segmentation. That's not the end. So, and Dow had to learn that a little bit too, because we had really good segmentation and lots of good stuff, but we realized it wasn't enough.
I know you guys have already gone over it, but what are the tools that once I assume you're all relatively mature, so what are the anomaly detection tools and are you using oversubscribed? What methods do you use particularly? Can you say?
Yeah, for us, we took a stab at it about 1.5 years ago and didn't like what we saw. So we're using some internal stuff right now, but we are going back out. We will be looking for stuff. So that's an easy answer for us.
Yeah, I would just say that it's not paranoia if it's true that there really are other people talking about it. Yeah. I'm nervous to share a specific vendor with you, one, because I don't want to tilt the room, but I'd be happy to share individually with somebody.
Do you want me to show you our slide? All the companies are up there. The one we had at the beginning?
Well, so with the basic blocking and tackling stuff, I think you could go back and look at the NIST documentation. That's where I would start. Everything that we started with was way back on NIST 853 and NIST 833, and now the cybersecurity framework. As a utility, we use the just as a maturity model to help us, we use the DOE's cybersecurity maturity model. That's very valuable because, again, it's about, I think one of you guys said it, just having that common language is so valuable because then you can take what the vendor says about how we can get you to this, and that if it's a standard you're using, then that would make sense for you. There are lots of tools that can do lots of things. I think what you've got to find is your use cases that really make sense. Again, it's kind of that treating gold like gold and pencils like pencils thing. Go figure out what your most critical processes are, and yours are different than mine in some ways. If it's about a DCS, then we've got a lot of similarities, but I have different points in my DCS than you do. And so we would maybe use something different, I don't know. But I think it's got to come down to what you're trying to accomplish, and that, as Sid said, there are lots of good vendors there, and I've got my personal favorites, but I'd share those with you offline.
Any more questions, or you want to say something?
Well,
Sid's got a question.
Yeah, no, I've got a couple. I mean, I've been making notes here. No, but there was something really interesting that you said, and I just wanted to follow up on it, because my next session is on IT/OT integration, convergence. But the
Sid,
comment-
use the microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was saying, there was something Jason said, and I think the others shook their heads or commented. But it was a comment you made about how you're getting more integrated with the operating people, your field people, I think is the term you used. And one thing that caught me about that was, you know, if you put in just anomaly and breach detection, using my terminology, something that just says something's funny here. If you put that in and it starts to, and it works, it's not just generating a million false alerts and all that, something meaningful, somebody's tuned it down to where they've gotten rid of a lot of the just normal stuff. I'm just wondering if that is a good step, just from an organizational perspective. We all want, one thing a lot of people want to do is to get more integration between their IT and OT groups. And often what I see, and I'm looking from way on the outside, to be honest, but is it's being pushed by the IT groups, trying to push, there's all these, I don't know, there's different purposes they're trying to do. I think they really are just concerned about security and they're responsible. But the OT people often think, no, you're just trying to get in here and take over my stuff. So there's that kind of thing. But in a way, the way you described it, I found very interesting, because in a way, if you get in a system that is just a sensor, something, a pure anomaly, nothing to do with what the threat is, something that would trigger them to call you and say, hey, something's funny here, it might be cyber, can you take a look? Can you come and help? That, to me, seemed like a very nice way to start that transition to get them involved. The best thing you could, I'm sure you love it anytime anybody calls you and says, can you please come out and help us? I mean, that's exactly the relationship you want. I was just curious. I really like that comment. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I just thought that might be a useful strategy. You buy anomaly and breach detection just to get them so they do that.
Well, so we had a lot of donuts for technicians and candy for operators way before we ever got to that point. It's about rapport building. Those guys understand their environment far better than I'll ever understand it, just because they're there every day. It's about a relationship and building that security culture. And again, we've got them enrolled, but they're not a hostage to the situation. They're enrolled and with us and understand. We've given them visibility into the console on the sensor so that they can see some stuff. And the action part is really mostly initiated by my team, but we would show the technicians, hey, this is exactly what we've seen. I can say that our program, as a security program from just an enterprise perspective and covering our operational technology systems, took off when we started to get adoption and engagement from our field personnel, because they can. I've seen failed deployments of technology solutions by IT people because they went about it the wrong way. It wasn't even what they were doing; it was just the way they went about it. And so, I don't know about in your worlds, but the plant manager at any location in my company is that guy's authority is inviolate, right? Like whatever he says goes, right? If it's paint the security guy purple and tar and feather him and send him home, that's what they're probably going to do. And so we haven't had that happen, fortunately, but that whatever they say. And so if they decide they don't want this touching their DCS, it doesn't matter. You won't get there. And so it's got to be about a partnership and connecting the kind of what's in it for me and that approach. And you're absolutely right. I love it. Even if it's 2 a.m. and I get a call and I have to drive 4 hours, whatever, it's fine. But at least then we're aware and we've got the ability to take action. Now, fortunately, because of my visibility now, I wouldn't have to go. I probably could just remote in and see some stuff. But I think it's a relational thing. As I mentioned, I think this is very much a people problem. That if you can get the people, everybody pulling the rope in the same direction, and I think this gets easier. And we can't fully understand our use cases unless we have all of the stakeholders involved. And so if you've got the plant manager and the technicians and anybody who's consuming any of those points along the way, then I think it's very helpful. And you're going to have a full set of use cases that you can then operationalize.
And I'm assuming when you have successes, when something was anomalous, they contacted you, you went and you actually helped. That just builds that trust.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Another question, and it was related to the one from Dispel. Dispel's a company that's sponsoring it, and they're giving a presentation tomorrow, and it happens to be a water system, but it's a distributed SCADA system. And the thing with deception, I might be mischaracterizing the product completely, but let's use that term, you used it, and I know what you meant by it. But one of the things I found interesting when I looked at the presentation was just the fact that if you have and you may have different, but particularly, I don't know if you have any pipelines, but okay, so particularly in a pipeline, a distributed network where a lot of you, they're old systems, so you probably have proprietary type connections and all that kind of stuff. But particularly if you're starting to go more and more through the internet and stuff like that, public networks, I would think, I'm not promoting anything here, I would think that's one place where that kind of deception or hiding that remote from any kind of access externally would have value, where within a plant, I'm only trying to contrast. I would think it's less an issue because everything's in the plant, everything's already connected to the network, so it's not like you're going to hide anything by moving things around. Maybe if somebody got in there, it would be helpful. I'm not trying to promote or discourage anybody about it, but I was just curious if it was something that would seem applicable to this, I'll use this just general SCADA situation, something where you're really going to remote, because that example, this case you're going to see in this presentation had to do with remote people calling in to be able to take care of remote sites.
Interesting. Yeah.
Which is, and you all have that issue. I'm just wondering, would it be valuable there? Would you think of it as valuable? Because it was something you didn't seem.
I'll just take this one real quick. So anytime I think about deception, my mind always immediately goes to honeypots and that kind of stuff. Systems out there you're wanting to use them for, maybe research or something. But and again, going back to a maturity model, that's all the way over to the one side of the maturity. And so if you've done everything else and it's time to move on to deception, then go for it. But I don't know very many companies that can I honestly say that we've done everything we can, so now we're going to go to deception. So my thing is, again, if you're looking for something to do, make sure you've done everything along that maturity model, and that you know exactly what's going on in your environment. You can say, you've done your pen test, you've done your purple teams, red team, blue team, all these things in your environment, and once you've crossed that path, then you can go on to that. And again, and that's just where, and then I appreciate it, and I'll move back, just to regress here a little bit, that you mentioned about bringing together, the OT and IT teams. I think that's something that this technology really does, that, for us, we're pushing this to our IT counterparts and saying, we have this solution, work with us and get it integrated into your, let's get it integrated to the SIM team, or the SIM to the SOC teams, and really work on the incident response so we can have a fully encompassing incident response where they see something, they get a hold of the plant and they work, through that incident. So yeah, this is one of those technologies that it's normally IT is pushing down or saying, we found something, you need to go do it in your plant, and that doesn't go over well. This is the reversed, and I think it's an interesting time of putting this in and working with those people like that. So.
Yeah, my experience from old time being an engineer many years ago, but I don't know. Plant managers, all they care is keeping that plant running. That's all they ever care about. And if you can say to them, I'm going to put something in that might detect something is going wrong, because one thing I've always said, and I think it's probably true, plant manager, my experience, many years, I meant this a long time ago, but I would be sitting there, something would fail, and I'm trying to fix it, and I'm telling you, every 5 minutes they'd be hanging over my shoulder saying, you got it fixed yet? So they understand the value of a minute of downtime. Yes. They want it done. So anything you can do to give them insight into a pending problem, and you might be able to avoid it, they just love that idea. So I could see the adoption from that side being very easy if it's presented that way.
Yeah.
But if you go to a plant manager and say, I want to put in something and it's for cybersecurity, I even have talked to some suppliers saying you should downplay the cybersecurity term because it's the other thing that resonates. But both sides. It's both sides. But I think when you say it's a cybersecurity thing, then it's get out of my office. But if you say it's something that can help you see something that's wrong, as long as it doesn't give too many false positives, then they're all for it, and they just jump at it. One, we still got just a final question, unless there's one more from out here.
No, we're out of time.
No, we got 5 minutes.
All right, well, go
Now-
ahead.
Now, just a final question. I mean, because you all have some experience with different kind of solutions, different tools. Some of you have used them, some of you have just investigated them. But is there anything that's not being done there? I've been a big proponent for years saying, suppliers don't like me to say that, but the solutions are there. A lot of companies are overwhelmed with solutions. They don't have the people to deal with them and the issue that you brought up, Jason. But is there something that's not in those solutions today, the threat detection, anomaly and breach detection type tools that you wish was there? You know, I mean, I'm trying to get some feedback for suppliers and as well as help others saying, what is it that you would like to have that you don't have? And maybe you're already overwhelmed with what you have. I don't know, but that's why I'm asking.
So I can tell you one of the things that I looked for that I didn't see, but in one place, the vendor that I selected was, and I don't think that in this space as it's starting to congeal, I don't know that people are, everybody's got a sensor now, and everybody can read DNP3 or whatever ICS protocol, and they can start to understand that. The part that I think is the differentiator for a company, at least for me, is that we've got somebody that's backstopping us to help us to be able to make sense of all of the data that we've got. And I truly think that as this market sort of shakes out, I think the ones that can provide the services are probably going to be the ones that can really be successful. The organization that can, hire the superstar talent and be able to keep it, and then be able to, in some way or another, watch the bad guys, and then be able to take the threat intelligence feed that now they've collected either from their sources within the government or non-government or friendships with anti-malware vendors or whatever, and then be able to help me feed it into my sensors to say, are you seeing these tactics, techniques, and procedures? That company that can backstop, right? Because I don't have to have a lot of skill if I've got these guys that are there helping me. They can augment, right? If I'm a municipal utility is a lot different than an investor-owned utility because they're just a lot more financially constrained. Well, so they don't have the same resources, and so they would be hard-pressed to be able to get a SOC in general, and to have them now have an OT SOC. And companies that are fairly small, like if you don't have the resources to do that, well then like I said, I think the companies that can, as this market shakes out, that can provide services. I think we've seen examples of that in lots of other verticals. Apple's services, their profits on that are through the roof right now, right? Amazon, they might make money selling stuff, but their big services now or their big moneymaker is AWS. Microsoft is selling services. And so they've got an idea, and I think that goes way back to even Microsoft's origins, where IBM thought that the hardware was the thing and really was the operating system.
Right.
I believe that the services and the intellectual property behind that, and then the understanding and the nuanced intelligence investigation, I think that's the differentiator. And I don't see a lot of people out there. I see a lot of people focusing on, I got to get this box into this environment and connect it up and be able to throw out some alerts for it, instead of, okay, we're all going to have that, and then what? Right? And then I don't want to put another one in.
But no, I'll put a big company spin on that, because while we may not buy as many services, because we believe that we need to keep some of this in-house, and maybe all of it, maybe a lot of it, we're still deciding, and we'll work that out. But if companies aren't able to stay ahead of us, right, aren't able to, aren't servicing some smaller companies so they understand what we're looking for, and we're constantly trying to wring new technology or new approaches out of them, that's not a good partnership, right? We're beyond where they are. And so that services, not only does it give them a revenue stream, but it forces them to look ahead and start thinking about, how do you turn these feeds into an intelligence? So I think it serves both purposes.
Absolutely.
And the only thing I'd add to that is, and I see there are some control system vendors in the room as well, is we do need to make sure that everything we do in the OT environment, we've got major industrial control system providers for Dow that need to be aware and at least reasonably willing to let this stuff happen and to engage in these, whether that's buying somebody and coming to us with an answer that integrates it, or just being able to work with these folks, right? This is a typical, this has happened over and over in technology, where you've got 1,000 companies, mostly small out there, doing this kind of stuff, and then 5 or 6 really big guys in the middle, and they need to work together.
Yeah.
And that's not easy for an end user to navigate.
Yeah.
even a big end user like Dow.
Well, and that challenge is always too, right? Your first move, if you say cybersecurity to a control system vendor, is they hit you with the, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to throw rocks, but it's just the truth. Okay, if you install anything cybersecurity in this control system environment, you will invalidate the warranty.
Yeah.
Which then makes the plant manager pull their hair out, and then you
Well,
get
the
trouble.
plant manager says go away.
Right, yeah, if you get that far. Right, so I think that I would say that that's one of the things I'm not seeing is that integration. I talked a little bit about that kind of hype cycle with these partnerships. I think we need the control system vendors to step up and make sure that they fully, and several of them do. Like we have several that I think are awesome and forward facing. But one of the things I would say is that I think the higher levels and echelons of our control system vendors are supportive of that. But when it gets down to like the regional sales guy that is actually servicing my company, then that guy's never heard of some of these efforts. And so it's imperative that the control system vendors are willing to work with, right? Because this will settle out. There'll be 3 or 4 vendors. You like a blue one, I like a red one, whatever. They're doing some almost commoditized things at some point. Well, the vendors have to be able to work with them. And I've got to be able to have whatever control system I have as an end user and also whatever anomaly detection system that I need to meet my use cases as an end user, not necessarily the one from the control system vendor. And if that one works, great, but I can't be constrained by, no, we only use this one. I think the market's got to win on that instead of a partnership. I don't know. That's a hot take, I'm sorry.
Okay, now I think we're done. We're actually ran over, I think. So I want to thank you. Please help thank our panelists.